So unfortunately, there's no big secret on removing tattoos from the skin when it comes to tools. So you need to use a mixture of tools that at least will make your life a bit easier. And what I'll end up using is the clone stamp tool and a couple of selections that make at least this image easier to do in terms of removing these tattoos. So we want to maintain as best possible the shadows in the image. This will either be new layers we create and or some that we maintain if we can. So making this look realistic is pretty big challenge, but it involves a lot of brushing, a lot of clone stamping, and some masking if we need it. So to get started, I want to maybe focus on the left arm first and get a good selection going of it. That way we can crop to the selection when we do paint, so we don't have to worry about overstepping the boundary there. So let me go ahead and get that selection. I'll hold Option and paint back in that portion and just get this going. We can refine that a tad just to get it default setting on it, and I'll just hit apply out the bat like that. Okay, so I'm going to make a new shape and I'm going to fill it with this color here. I had actually sampled the skin before, but I'll do it again just to show. Grab that color. We're going to fill it just for sake of filling it, and now we have a pixel layer that has the mask of that image. So at any point I can command click that and we can go and do our business. So why don't I just decrease the opacity for now. There's really no point in having the fill at this point, but we can leave that going. While that's going, I'll go ahead and grab the clone stamp tool and just basically work away at the skin. Wherever there's open parts of the skin I need to sample. These arms aren't completely full, luckily, so we have some bare skin to sample. So if you're using an image that maybe has complete sleeves, it might be quite a challenge to get this to work right. But that's something you can maybe, hopefully find a workaround for. So as we slowly integrate this, I'll speed up the video so you can see the final piece once we get done. Okay, so with that side done, we have a pretty pale looking arm, but it is complete. It needs some TLC, we'll say that. So in this pixel layer that I have as the selection, I'm going to make a new layer. I'm actually just going to duplicate that layer, to be honest. So I'll duplicate that and I'll bring up that opacity a bit, and it's on top of the other one at this point, so we can even go as far as making the color a tad darker, maybe kind of more of the fleshy color. And let's see if we can get some of that pigment to come through. Kind of multiply. Let's see what blend mode might work here. Kind of keep that as is. So it's even lighter in that regard. So maybe I'll leave that out, but I am going to use it as a guide to paint on some shadows. So I do want a smaller or darker tone, more like something you'd see on the ends of the fingers down here, just for the purposes of the edge. So why don't I create one more when we have that mask handy, so anywhere we paint it's going to remain in that mask, which is great. I do want to decrease the opacity quite a bit because I just want to almost airbrush this on in a sense, just to give some of that contouredness back into the arms since they are rounded. So we'll go ahead and try that, kind of establish some more shadows. So maintain the highlight, you want to keep it kind of that running line down the arm there, and we'll leave that as it is and see if we can work in a bit darker of a color here, just around the edge. I remember the shoulder was pretty dark before we started painting, so it had that kind of concave portion back there. We want to maintain that since there's kind of a cavity going on as the arm is flexed. Great. So that's starting to look a little more lifelike. It's not, definitely doesn't have the texture we need yet, so we'll have to add that. We can do that again with another selection and a new layer. And in fact, the one we just added, we could probably just add some noise to it, but I think what I'll do is use a filter to add some noise, and hopefully it applies to this selection. See where it's happening here. Okay, it's only applying to what I brushed. So I will undo that, come back in. Okay, so let's add that noise to this layer to start. Come down to add noise filter. Intensity, see how it does. So it's adding it, it's not quite perfect. Gaussian. Okay. All right, we'll leave that alone. And it looks like it could be tightened up for sure back here. So previewing these layers real quick. I want to mask this out and kind of round this arm out a bit because it's all right. I think we want to add a touch more to that filter since that selection isn't quite to where we want it. So I'll just do this freehanded. So I won't have the selection going, but I do want to sample where we were and just continue on. Looks like our hardness is up. Let's make sure we're on the right layer. I think I can do so. Maybe like so. Yeah, okay. So I'll do this, bring down the opacity again, and just focus on adding that back. And we can always mask more out later to refine it. So I'll do that right now actually. So before I do, yeah, there we go. I want to mask this bit of a hard brush. This will want black, so we can just take away from it. And I need a mask first, so let's make one. There we go. And we can just kind of refine this edge. So those are two pixel based layers that aren't quite one yet, but ever so slightly kind of work on that, make it more realistic. And this could even be more pronounced. Maybe we could make a blend mode out of it or increase the color to be a bit different. I'll leave it at normal and possibly duplicate it. Might help with things. And then we can come back in with, say, another brush. Let's make a new layer. We'll just make this a texture brush. So I'll grab just a basic texture brush that's really fine. And that one's too, maybe something like that. Yeah, we kind of just want to create like a sponge look or a skin tone. A makeshift one. Spray paint might work because it's kind of that pore look as skin is. People will go with something like so, but just increase the radius quite a bit. And then we'll mask to that and make this new texture. Obviously we don't want it to be very pronounced. Hardness pretty soft. And the color, we want it to be like what our skin color is in the shade. So something like that. Still not night and day difference, but we need to like kind of re-mimic these shadows, and those are just going to be a bunch of layers to make that work. So I'll do that with more brushes in a sense. So I'll go back to basic, grab a regular brush, increase the width, decrease the hardness. Width needs to be pretty massive. And if we look at this arm for reference, there's like a contour here, so we need more of a shadow, I think, at this point. So I'm going to use that selection again as a guide there. You could create a custom channel here if you wanted to have that pixel selection just saved. That's another video that I do if you want to check that one out, that talks about channels. But let's get this one going and possibly use, let's see if this color is too dark. No, it's actually quite nice. Just want to accent certain parts of the arm, like under here there's that forearm bone. Kind of want that to come through, and maybe in the wrist a bit. Same with the fingers, there's little gaps in these areas. Those are a little perfect, so probably decrease the size perhaps, and the opacity for sure. Kind of vary that portion, and we can always bring this back in the opacity to kind of just make it blend in a bit, and even use a filter on it to kind of blur it, maybe a Gaussian blur. Just to make them look like there's bone under those pieces of skin, of course. So we can continue that process, maybe doctor these up a bit. Alright, so there's the portions of the arm that have been doctored up. We can group those, and we'll just call it arm. And I'm going to keep the right arm as is, just to show by example, just so I don't take up all your time just doing both of these arms. But this is essentially how you would at least approach the concept of removing tattoos. You kind of need to recreate the arm itself, doctor up what is there, but also kind of add some shapes and actual color to the image, as opposed to just trying to subtract it with the clone stamping tool, because it worked for me most of the way, but there were parts of the arm that were just giving me trouble. So you would have to actually add those things back in as opposed to subtracting. So as always, you could go ahead and factor these even more, refactor I should say. So maybe shadows and highlights, kind of bring up the shadows. Only apply it to the arm though, so let's grab it there. Something like that. And then with that, we can even do a blend mode. That's kind of realistic color burn, and then bring it back some. Yeah, it's looking okay. The noise is a little much. I think it's this layer. Trying to find that texture. I think it's that layer. Yeah, it could be toned down a notch. Maybe color burn as well. Oops. More or less a ton of experimentation. So find ways to make things, you know, look right to you, and then try different filters or blend modes. The blend modes, there's never been a moment where well, a few maybe, but there's a moment where you just know the perfect blend mode for your composition. Most of the time you're trialing and erroring, and what's great is Affinity Photo has tons of these, as opposed to something like Photoshop, where it only has maybe half this many, and they don't update in like live time. So that's a, you know, definite downgrade to me. So coming over to Affinity Photo has been great for that. You can see there's parts of this arm or hand that aren't quite there yet, so we could even add more touch-ups to this, like so. So there we go. That is a take on going the extra mile and basically making that arm from scratch. So there's quite some touch up you can do to make these lines a lot nicer, because that initial selection was kind of, it was okay, but it's not perfect when you're looking at it. So if we go all the way back to hiding that arm, or I'll use the history meter, so I'll save this first and then go back to the beginning. So you'll see definitely some more realistic shadows in there, but if you worked with that longer and got it to where it made more sense, you could definitely get a very close concept in there. So that's at least how I would approach it. I'm not saying this is perfect. It's far from actually at this point, but To save some time, I'm just going to show you how I would approach that and what you can do to go ahead and try to remove some tattoos from skin. It's basically a combination of making a selection around that object or arm or whatever piece of skin you're using the clone stamp tool to get the area of the skin around it, and then toying with shadows and highlights by painting those on top. And a quick tip that makes life so much easier is to get a selection of the object itself and then just paint using that as your guide, so you can't go outside that boundary, so you always have that to fall back on.